All right, good evening. This is the August 11th meeting of the Charter Committee. Tonight we're going to be starting a section of the charter on other elected officers. So we're going to, and then after that we really just have minutes. If we have time, we'll go through a tracker document. I'm not sure if we'll have time. So we're going to start off with our friends Anthony and Melvin to get us started. Unless somebody else has something else they want to say before we get started? Oh, okay. Anthony, you're on.
Sounds good. Let me just, I'm pulling up the document. So you would have just received today a couple of documents. We're going to just go through them. We're going to start with the framework. So the section that we're talking about here is Article 4. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, the section we're in here is Article 4. It's titled Other Elected Officials. So it doesn't cover the select board, and you will have another section later about the school committee. But all the other elected positions, both individuals and elected bodies, we're going to discuss here. Before we get into the language of the section, which I sent to the group with some notes, I want to go through sort of a framework for thinking about why a particular position should be elected versus appointed. And then we're going to go through an analysis we did over the past 10 election cycles of how competitive each election is. So I'll start here. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to share the first document, which is the framework for considering elected versus appointed officials. Now, I just want to say up front that this is a general framework. I'll touch on this as we go through each of the different elements. But you know, even if you think something clicks all the boxes on one side, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be elected or appointed. You know, the character, the history of your community will reflect on where you put things in the box. This is just a framework to think about things. And then the other thing I just want to say at the outset is government in general has become more complicated. It has required more domain expertise over the past 20, 30 years. So I'm going to give some examples as we go through some of these, but even within these examples, there's going to be sort of a level of expertise that may not fully fit with the sort of criteria. So I'll point that out as we go through. So, you know, I'll do this very quickly, but the first, you know, we'll just go down the line here. So, you know, as you're considering elected versus appointed, elected officials are making more policy decisions versus an appointed official. I think a good one to sort of think about here is, you know, your select board in cities, your city councils, things of that nature. They are making general decisions about the direction of the community, presumably over several years, and they're not sort of in the day-to-day sort of how do we make it happen on the ground level the way a staff might. So that's sort of, as you can think about sort of the policy making versus, so in some ways, when you think about the policy making, there's an issue and we want to resolve the issue. That's a policy making body. We want to implement the solution. That's minimal policy making authority. That's sort of the authority to implement a policy. And that will point you more into the appointed box. The two boxes beneath there, I'm going to sort of talk about together, which is few ministerial responsibilities and tasks whose performance are guided entirely by statute, and little or training or expertise required to quickly become effective in this work. As I said before, this can get a little iffy. So a lot of communities, I won't say a lot, but there's a trend across communities to make, for example, town clerks, which had been an elected position in many towns. A lot of communities are making that an appointed position. Some of that is driven by the fact that that position has a lot more requirements under state law that are requiring them to do certain specified things. And so they're looking for, if not lawyers per se, they're looking for people with some history in government or some government education. So that's not happening everywhere, but that's a place where the trend towards more responsibility and more requirements from the state are leading this position to become appointed versus elected. But you'll still see many elected clerks, particularly in smaller towns across the state. This is an interesting one. The roles and tasks are easily and widely understood by the public versus them being complicated and not widely understood. Again, I think here a good example is the clerk. or I guess a confusing, maybe in fact counterexample is the clerk, because there are someone looking from the outside may think they understand what that position does, but then when you get in the role, they often find that there's sort of many more things than they would have initially thought. But it's still a fairly good framework in the sense that I think when you look at this particular box, sort of expertise in the role, you really want to think about it in the context of, am I in this position to bring my experience as a citizen or resident to this role, or am I in this position to bring some specific professional qualifications? For example, as members of the town meeting, you are engaging in policy making, you're voting on articles, and you're bringing your experience or background as residents in the community to make those decisions. Versus, for example, the fire chief or the police chief or some other position where you're looking for a professional who's experienced in this particular role or responsibility and is bringing their professional experience to that position. All right. The nature of the position or board or role is relatively simple for the public to evaluate the performance of and its policy-making duties. And again, the opposite is for the appointed position. Again, the examples here, I'll use, for example, your select board versus perhaps your town administrator. The town administrator is doing a lot of nitty-gritty things on the day-to-day versus the select board is working at a higher level. And in fact, people are rating the people or evaluating those people in that position based on how well they're feeling represented or their issues are being addressed. The position or board is helpful as a check or balance against another center of power in the community. That's actually a very important one. In many ways, the town meeting is a check against the select board. It's, spending the money, they're allocating the money, and vice versa. The select board is a counterbalance to the town meeting. They're bringing that sort of, they're more connected to the day-to-day operations of the town, and they're bringing that expertise as they're crafting the budget and presenting it to town meeting. Or not crafting the budget, but are commenting on things that may be on the budget. Second to last, it is not critical to the effective and efficient functioning of the government for this position or board to cooperate regularly with other officials. Again, the wording here is a little bit funky because in your town, in every town, all the positions have to work together as part of the organization that is the government. However, some positions have more autonomy. Again, I think this really reflects back on the policy making. They're setting the standard that other bodies have to follow. Again, good examples are your planning board, your select board, your school committee. They have a domain responsibility. Some other entities can have some say here, but for the most part, they can exercise pretty much full authority within their particular domain versus a more functional position, which is implementing policy and is sort of beholden to the other departments or groups within town government. And the last one, which was a good transition to the competitiveness, and this is often a driving factor in many communities as they switch from appointed to elected for certain positions, particularly positions like I mentioned at the top, the town clerk, the treasurer, things of that nature, is that they're finding that they're not getting enough qualified candidates to participate in a competitive race. Now, just because you're not regularly getting competitive races, that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily transition that position to appointed. As we'll touch on when we see the competitiveness chart, you've got something that is actually very common in most communities, which is you've got a town moderator. The moderator position is not competitive in terms of if we look at the past 10 years. And that's not uncommon amongst towns, but that's always an elected position. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to transition over to the chart, but before I do that, I went through that kind of quickly. Are there any questions?
No, I think that's helpful, yeah.
I'm sorry, was there a question?
No, I said it's helpful, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to put up here. So let me just orient you to this map, this chart first and foremost. can everybody see it pretty well? I know you've got copies, but can you see what's on the screen fairly well?
Yep.
Okay. So just the orange shoots the map to this chart. So on the left-hand side are all of the elected boards, committees, positions within Littleton. Obviously, there are some that are not part of the Article 4, the Select Board, the School Committee, but just for completeness sake, we include those in the competitiveness analysis. The numbers, well, on the top, voter turnout, that is for the elections that we looked at. For the most part, the town clerk lists how many, what percentage of the voting population turned out. So we have that at the top here by year for the dates that that information was available, and then the numbers next to each board, committee, or position. Those are not the people that ran. That's the ratio of candidates to available seats. So, for example, if there was one seat available, and I'm sorry, if there were 2 seats available and 2 candidates ran, the ratio would be 1. So that would be the number here. So the higher the ratio means the more candidates there were for any given seat in a particular election. And that's a good way to sort of normalize so that all of these positions sort of can be analyzed in the same way rather than sort of putting the raw numbers there. As you're looking at the numbers, a competitive election is one with a number greater than 1. So, the 1 just means there was just one person for each seat. That means voters did not have any other choice other than the person who ran. Whereas a number greater than 1 means that there was at least one more person in the seats available to run. And then the last thing before I sort of walk through this is on the side here. This is the average over the 10-year time period. I'll sort of encourage the group to look here as we talk about which positions are not competitive. So, as I said before, your town moderator, and again, this is not unusual for towns. The town moderator is generally, for the past 10 election cycles, is not a competitive position. There's usually just one person running for that seat. The same thing for the town clerk. The Board of Assessors is one in which there are less, or at least over the 10-year time period, there are instances where less than the number of seats available there was a candidate for. So that's one where you're dipping below even, filling the open seats. A similar thing is reflected here for the Housing Authority seats that are running. Their Cemetery Commissioner you're getting at least one candidate for each election, but it's not competitive. And again, the Trust Fund Commissioners, those are seats that on certain occasions you're not getting, even one candidate to run. Again, this is over a 10-year time period. Now, this is part of the framework that we talked about before, which is in terms of thinking about just because the seats aren't necessarily competitive, that doesn't mean that you should automatically make this an appointed position. But I will say specifically for the Board of Assessors and your planning board is competitive. Those are boards that we do see communities going towards appointing. And one of the reasons for appointing, in addition to the lack of competitiveness in some communities, is the need to get, I wouldn't say need, but there's an interest in getting people with specific domain expertise, particularly into these roles of land use or taxation. Now, I would say most communities, particularly towns, still have an elected planning board, but there are some that have gone to appointed, and there are a rising number of communities that are going to appointed Board of Assessors. I would say that there could be some challenges there related to filling those appointments because particularly for assessors and getting people with the financial background to do that. That's a very competitive, not in terms of elections, but in terms of hiring. That's a very competitive space, and there are not many people with that background. So the next thing we would do is look at the language. But again, like I did before, I want to stop here. I'm assuming there might be some questions on the graph and at the information presented.
Anthony, is there a difference in the candidate pool when you're talking elected fill versus appointed fill? For example, does an elected person need to reside within the town, or can they reside outside of the town? And similarly, can a appointed person reside outside of the town?
That's a good question. So an elected person has to be a resident of the town to run for an elected position. And so in that case, your pool of candidates is limited to the residents, which can be limited. Whereas an appointed person, depending on how the position is crafted, because there are some communities that do have a residency requirement, but that's not a requirement. You have the possibility of having a much wider pool of candidates. You're not limited just to the people that live in town. I would say that, for the charter, we're not necessarily going to get into each position per se, within town, but I will say, as I said before, particularly those financial positions, those are becoming very competitive across the Commonwealth. There aren't that many of them, or that many people that do them, and so there's just kind of a bidding war between communities around acquiring those types of people. So that's to say that I don't say you run that risk, but if you turn a position, for example, like the Board of Assessors appointed, perhaps you get a more professionalized individuals to be able to fill those seats. However, you're now competing with every other city in the state to get that person. So I'll stop there.
A very technical question, but one that I want to scratch. No data in 2020, Anthony, and for whatever reason, I'm curious about that. But was the denominator used in calculating the average 10 years or 9 years, given the no data in 2020?
Really good question. So yeah, for whatever reason, we couldn't find the data for 2020. We have the averages are based on the places where you don't see the dashes. So the dashes are null spots. So those were not part of the calculation for the average.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
The staff people that work under the board or report to the board, they're hired and appointed through a different process, is that correct? These board positions are of the elected town residents. So we've got professional staff doing the work.
Right.
That are being hired from wherever, plus a board that oversees them that are elected by town residents and who are town residents. So it's not, I don't know, I guess how much
well-
expertise does the board have to have?
Yeah, like,
to-
you guys talk about the Board of Assessors, how does that work? So the people that are on the Board of Assessors, they're doing the actual work? No, they're still a board, and so you still have the people in town hall that are actually doing
People
it.
actually, the chief assessor and the people who work under the chief assessor do all the outside work that has to be done.
Okay.
Compile the statistics. And I don't think there's a whole lot of actual work done by the assessors themselves or the Board of Assessors, except ask questions and make sure or look through it.
So it's more of that
Yeah.
oversight.
So
If
it's
I
all
remember
policy and the
correctly-
oversight again, huh? Yep.
Even when you're elected to the Board of Assessors, there is some required training at state level
Yeah, that's
that you
correct.
have to pass.
That's correct, yeah.
Anything else you want to add to that, Tim?
But they sit as a board, they meet every month or so, and they would vote on, new real estate values, for instance, or, different.
Yeah.
And they make the recommendation to the select board for the tax classification hearing. I
So
mean,
there is some level of expertise or understanding.
As Alan
required.
points out, there's an assessor's, like an intro to being an assessor course with the state that you have to take and pass after you get elected to a board.
Got it. Okay,
So
I'm just
they-
thinking back to that
No,
framework where it's
yeah.
like easily understood by.
No,
you know,
it's
anybody
not easily
versus-
understood.
Right.
I understand a lot about it, it's still not easily understood.
But the chief
Yeah.
assessor, who's a recruited position, is an industry specialist.
Yes.
Right.
So it's not that we don't have the expertise doing the work, it's how much of the board can we get that understands the nature of the work.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Question about the chart. Do these average numbers track with similar towns? I mean, 1.3, 1.4 seems low, but is that actually kind of normal for small towns to have that? Or are we, where does Littleton stand in the grander scheme of things for having competitive elections?
So for example, for the town, so the most obvious ones are for the town moderator, the town clerk, and the board of assessors. You're generally in line with most other communities in terms of how competitive those elections are. Now, when I say generally in line, there's a big dispersion here. So, I would say you're not outside of the norm, particularly in those particular seats. You've got, so we identified 10 comparator communities. Let me see, I have the list somewhere. Where's the list? So you have 10 comparator communities that we've been using throughout this process: Plainville, Blackstone, Brewster, Groton, Maynard, Sturbridge, Sutton, Ware, Hull, and Townsend. So particularly when I like those positions, you're sort of within the realm. You've got generally more elected boards than most of the comparator community, than your comparator community. So I would say that's where you're probably skewed a little bit different. You've got, so we'll get into this in a second when we actually start going through the language, but a lot of these communities don't have the trust fund, the elected trust fund board. I'm trying to think of which other ones. Well, we'll get into some of these details because you've got I'll wait for a second. So you've got more boards than many of your communities, not many more, but a few more. But you're generally in line in terms of the candidate pool with your comparative communities.
What's a little bit interesting to me is that over 10 years, it hasn't changed that much. I would have almost thought that the numbers would have gotten, worse over time, but it seems like for the past 10 years, it's relatively consistent.
Except for voter turnout.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Well, it's interesting that, if you have very low voter turnout and non-competitive race, you're sort of,
Why?
yeah, exactly, especially when you consider the efficiency and the cost as well. I mean, all of these things come at a cost for the town, logistically as well. 15% of voting residents having an election where there's no choice. It's
Well, and that may be one why you only have 15% is because there's not
maybe,
competitive races, right?
If you had a more competitive, exciting race.
right, when people are more interested and
Yeah.
have a choice to make.
Yeah.
Yep, Rob?
I would say your voter turnout is on the higher side. You were used to seeing voter turnout, particularly in municipal elections, in the teens, low 20s. So you're a little bit on the higher side.
Rob?
I'd look to Tim as being the expert, that our town meeting participation from a resident standpoint is lower. I mean, 400, 500 would be a frequent count in terms of town meeting participation.
Lower than what, though?
Yeah, I mean, lower than other
Lower than the
communities.
percentage in terms of if we've got 77, 7,800, voting, population.
Yeah,
I mean, it's,
well, if you've got 7,000 or 8,000 voters, I think the most I've ever seen is 1,200. And you're talking about a school or a swimming pool.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Or an athletic field.
Yeah, right, right, yeah.
I'd say the baseline, I mean, it's probably 300 is about the average, I would say, for, run-of-the-mill town meeting.
So if you have more
And I don't think,
interesting or compelling
Yeah,
things
depends
for the
what you've
community,
got on
then
the-
you're gonna get more turnout.
on the docket.
Yeah.
And yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's out of step with a lot of other area communities. I think Anthony and Mel can attest to that. Town meeting attendance is not robust in Massachusetts. And we've tried various things to improve that attendance. I mean, I think the booklet that gets sent out to the people was one thing that we did to kind of inform people ahead of time. And so we tried various things, and changing the day to a Saturday. We did that for a year, and that didn't
matter.
Saturday in May was not a popular time for
Yeah.
people who had sports and
Yeah.
first communions and the like. So
On the other hand, I think part of that story, honestly, I think is, and they can talk about this, but also in Littleton, I think people just kind of generally have a comfort feeling that things are okay and people are running things okay, and so they don't, it's like, it's good, I'm gonna focus on something else because I'm okay with it,
yeah.
And that's not
Especially
necessarily the right
if
answer, but-
if the finance committee, if people feel the finance committee has vetted something, if the select board is to propose it, if the FinCom, is in agreement, if they raise a hand and say, we're not on board with it, it generally doesn't carry the day. I mean, I think that's what we'd say. You've got to have everyone.
So along those themes, though, that if you were to suggest that some of these transition from an elected to an appointed position, you would be sort of relying a little bit on that impression that that would also be done well, right? That there would be a continued trust in the process, that the right people would be appointed, and that things would continue to go well. I think that the counter to that is suddenly it's a sort of sense of consolidation of power, and that now the community doesn't have a voice in who is in those positions. Because I think if you just look at it objectively on paper, there's a decision that seems maybe obvious for some of these things, but then when you factor in how people feel about that, does it erode any trust in some of the decisions that are being made? I think to me that's the harder.
So it's interesting, I mean, think about, and I'm not picking on anybody, but like cemetery commissioner. I expect the cemetery to be well-maintained and run and what it does. I don't need that, is that an elected position? Is that the kind of thing, well, I think it ought to be this way and I think it ought to be that way. You just don't see it.
So if it weren't elected, it would be appointed, and I presume by the select board, is that right?
I think so, yeah. Or a town manager.
Or town manager.
Or, yeah.
Oh, that's my question, actually.
Right, yeah.
That's my
That's the
question.
other thing we're
Right.
talking about, right?
That would be the other part of the discussion.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Is it who's doing the appointing? May, critical.
Well, it's two
Well, that would be
questions.
the decision of this board as you're creating the charter. You would
Yeah.
decide who.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would seem to maybe, like, if we're going to try to make, move towards efficiency, to take something away from being elected, to move it to appointed, to then have multiple reporting lines seems kind of, you're almost making it more messy in a way. I feel like if you're going to make a recommendation that you would have one of these move from elected to appointed, it would make sense to then line it up with everything else we're recommending, which the trend has been, okay, have that then report to a town manager. Right.
Well, that's a section, there's really two questions.
Yeah.
Who appoints the person, and then to whom do they take direction?
True. I mean, I think that both of those
I hope
in
that would be the
previous
same one.
discussions have been leaning town manager, yeah.
And I think on the latter, it's more of a collaboration with internal people, like what committee were we talking, the assessors?
Yeah.
They don't report to anybody per se, do they? They just collaborate with
Well,
the assessor department?
they're part of the finance department, so they're one leg of that. So I guess whoever the finance director is, they take direction from them and also from town administrators. So.
And that goes back to, so we were saying, for instance, that the chief assessor currently is accountable to the board of assessors, and this is where that MOU piece comes in, that then what is the town manager's role managing the chief assessor versus...
The day-to-day stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I,
Is
think,
there,
again,
is there an MOU with the
I don't know.
Board of Assessors? I don't think so.
So right
No.
now, it's maybe the
But it is
Board of
listed as
Assessors.
So it must be
board
just-
slash
You got on.
TA.
Okay.
There is?
If I
They had
may-
a dual track for
Okay.
reporting.
If I may, Mel, do
Yeah.
you want to chime in on that? Because I know you've got that section on the executive, on the question of the assessor. Did you have that or information?
Yeah, I don't believe there is a memorandum between the Board of Assessors and the Select Board. I have to look into more about the details of the interrelationship between the Finance Director, Finance Department, and the assessors. The assessors, by state law, set the tax rate and do other financial functions independently.
So assuming, let's take the Board of Assessors as an example. Assuming we move to an appointment model, is there still a need for a board, like a board to have oversight, or would the chief just report directly to the town manager?
You, under,
Yep,
go on, Mel. Go on, Mel.
Mel,
No,
go
I
ahead.
believe there is a requirement to have Board of Assessors.
Okay.
And they're volunteers, they're not employees, they're not
The board is.
That brings me to my second question.
right.
Yeah, right.
Is that right? The Board of Assessors are not employees and they're not paid, right? They're volunteers, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So section
Well,
4.1D.
I would say that in some communities, in some charters, the director, the chief assessor, actually is a member of the board, but it depends. That's not required.
So in section 4.1D, it says compensated for elected offices, if any, shall be set by bylaw at regular town meeting, which I read to imply that appointed offices would be compensated. So if we switch these from an elected to an appointed, does that mean that we incur additional costs?
For the board.
And say that
Say,
again?
where were you reading, Kyle?
Section
Where you
4.1D.
Well,
1D.
He's
We're electing,
transitioning
if
to
any.
the proposed language. Do you want me to, let me just introduce let me answer your question first. So were you saying that there was a financial obligation by making the positions appointed?
Well, so section 4.1D to me reads that elected offices by nature are not compensated unless the bylaw is set at town meeting. So if we decide to switch some of these elected offices to appointed, does that in turn say that they must be compensated?
So just because a position is appointed doesn't mean that it's is I mean, this gets a little hairy, so let me try to say this as simply as possible. Everyone who is elected or appointed in town is an employee of town in some fashion. I think we had a discussion about you guys sort of being special town employees participating in this board. You're appointed, you're not compensated. So you could structure an appointed position in a way in which it's volunteer in the sense that it's unpaid. However, if we're using assessors as the example, if you're getting, it depends on how you structure it. If you're changing assessor to appointed because you want to make sure that you get a certain professional qualification, then you probably would want to attach some salary to it. I don't know if we wouldn't necessarily put that in the charter, but that would be something that the administration of the town could implement if you moved the position to appointed.
When you said, Anthony, that it's getting competitive across towns to appoint some of these roles, I was wondering if you meant competitive in terms of compensation or just the ability of people willing to do it, or both.
There's I don't know, it has been for years a dwindling pool of people with experience in municipal finance. As an example, just last year, before the budget challenges that the state's now facing, the governor had floated the idea of a municipal finance training program to sort of boost that population of people. So there's a small and shrinking population of individuals with this type of education and experience. That's number one. And then number two, we do see communities, for lack of a better term, poaching these types of positions from one another. I was just in a call last week where someone was complaining to me about how their neighboring community had offered a higher salary for one of these types of positions. So, as the pool shrinks, then people, clamor to sort of get a person to fill that role.
So Anthony, when we're weighing up the sort of pros and cons of elected versus appointed, it also seems like, can we fill the positions? Like with an elected position, you're relying on someone to step up and offer their, or have sort of a willingness to proactively step into that role. And if you then move it to appointed, you sort of switch the burden of search almost onto the town to say, now you got to go and hunt down those individuals and maybe convince them to come and contribute their time pro bono, or pay them. But I think that's an interesting kind of conundrum there, because you're basically saying, you're shifting the onus onto the town to say you've got to find these people versus
The other side of that is, some people be willing, if you appoint me, fine, but I don't want to run, I don't want
That's
to,
right.
I don't want to be
A
elected.
lot of people don't want
Yeah, so.
to be out
that's
there
the other side of it, too.
campaigning,
yeah,
but they're happy like you to come and
yeah,
serve, you
yeah.
know?
No, you're right.
So
Takes a lot of
it's
time to-
you're
yeah.
right, it's a conundrum. And then the other thing is you talked about if it's appointed, technically it could be outside of the town, but I don't know, especially if it's a volunteer position, I don't know why anybody would, and I'd be suspect almost. Somebody outside of your town would want to volunteer to be on your,
But I think your prior point is a very good one about, I wouldn't want to get signs and, I just wouldn't do it. But
You know
I
where
would
you name on
volunteer.
a lawn sign?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have, and
Right,
would
right.
be willing to raise my hand and say, but not under an election. So I think that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
A point too that, like the Board of Assessors, say there's nobody running, there are opportunities that the people who are on that board get together, try to find somebody, and you have a write-in person that's going to volunteer those 3 years. So that's how it's worked in the past.
Which is kind of like an appointment almost.
Almost like an
And
appointment.
you're appointed by the board as opposed to by the town man. And honestly, the trust fund commissioners work the same way. It's kind of the same thing. And that's another one. It's like, does anybody know what they do? Most people don't.
It's a tough thing, but it's functioned.
Huh?
It
Yeah.
does function.
Yeah, and you do want someone who knows something, and so by having those board just say, well, let's find somebody to replace the guy who's leaving or the gal who's
Yeah.
leaving.
And if you had, again, assuming things function, which is, I guess, what we're trying to figure out, is if the town manager was responsible for appointing a vacant position on the board, they would consult with existing members
Right.
of the board to say who should we reach out to essentially write them in. So I think if you had that process, you wouldn't really be looking at a major change. You would just say, yeah, those people don't have to get their lawn signs.
Right.
They can.
Tell all their friends to write me in and see what happens now with some of them. Yep.
This, using the word conundrum seems appropriate. This seems like a conundrum, making this decision. And it just occurred to me, should we devise some kind of tool for using the criteria that attach to A and applying these criteria to each of those roles or boards and see what this
If I just may suggest, so the criteria is, I find with groups, that it's very helpful, but it's not a checkbox. We checked all the boxes, so this should be in this category. It's more left to your judgment, but to give you some sort of guide rails to how to think about positions. It's not specifically on there, but sort of inherent in the way that attachment is structured is if you move something from elected to appointed, or vice versa, although nobody really goes in either direction, that's a change for the town. And any change is something that has to be explained and can be a point of friction when you go to town meeting. So if you decide to change one of these positions to appointed, I would really recommend that you change it because there is some real major glaring issue that has to be addressed in terms of like you're never getting anyone to run, or something of that nature, and that you've talked to whoever is currently on the board or might be affected by it before then. Again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't make the change. I'm just saying you got to think for the residents who will be, many of them will be seeing this for the first time at town meeting. It'll seem kind of big, and you want to make sure that you're saying there's a big problem here, and that's why we had to make the change.
Anthony, do you want to go through Article 4 that you have written out with all the...
If you're right, I do want to stop the discussion because we're having a good conversation.
I didn't know that if we went through this first and went back to this conversation that we're having, would it make more sense?
Well, let's jump into it. I will Actually, now before I put it on, I do want to just point out one thing, which I'd be curious to see if it starts some more discussion. So, before I transition over to the actual language, I did want to point out the Electric Light Commission and the Water Commission. And I will just have everyone harken back to a moment to when you had the plant manager here speaking to the group. And I was a little surprised to hear that it's one board, a light and water commission that runs the light and water department. Because as you can see, you're having elections for water commissioners and for electric light commissioners. And it seems that the practice in town has been that people who run for one of these positions automatically just post papers for the other. And so you've got 5 people elected, the same 5 people are on both boards, so they kind of operate as
That's what
as
the
one
statistics
board,
show.
as a march.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, the legal structure doesn't really say that. Now, when we transition over to the language, for the most part, I structure the language to look like what you're currently already doing, except for the light and water department. Now we can change it back if you want to keep them as separate elected, but I think there are some risks there related to, if for some reason somebody decides to run for one board and not the other, then I think, you've gotten into the practice of doing this and it may cause some friction in the future. So I wanted to just tell you that as we transition to the language, and I don't know if anybody wanted to say anything. I know some members on the committee have served on this board in some form or fashion.
I know that in the past, and I'm only just talking about even last year, we had a person that moved into town that was brand new, that had experience with service boards as far as electricity goes, and was only going to run for that board, which would have put things into a hard way to have that board actually work, because you're at a meeting and you're only going to vote on certain things, but you're not going to vote on the next thing, and you're going to vote on something else. So there had been discussions in the past that if it was in the charter, I guess there is a possibility that you could have light and water commission just be called light and water commissions and not have it separate. So I don't know if that's an angle we would want to take, or if it's possible to take.
I think we would want to take it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so obvious that
Well, the
one.
only downside of that is if they ever want to split it out, now you're talking about another thing again. And maybe we never do, I don't know.
It seems like
It
there
has
was
been
some
recommended though that it has.
major infrastructure
Yeah.
implications as
Oh, it
well.
does.
So I feel like if they were to split it out, it certainly wouldn't be in the next 10 to 20
gonna happen quickly,
years
yeah.
at
You
least.
can change the
this
charter.
seems like- Yeah.
Right,
So
you
it's
can always
sort
change
of
the charter.
In the time that we're
Yeah.
thinking of, it seems like a literally physically robust combination.
So, Anthony, is this one of the things that's as simple as if we say in the charter it's one board, that makes it happen?
Yeah, pretty much. Now, there's some things. Let me go to so the short answer. The short answer is yes, but there's some nuances that are in that section I highlighted red, which when we go through it, we can sort of touch on. But Mel, did you want to comment? You had your hand raised.
No, why don't you go through it, Anthony? I think you're going to cover it.
Anthony, can I just go back to, you said an important, or a point worth considering, that as we think about this, whether appointed or elected, that we maybe don't, that we look at whether there's an issue present that would cause us to make that flip. But I don't know of any cemetery commissioner issues that would cause us, but we probably would be inclined to move to an appointed, I would think, based on history here. Yeah, there's never been more than one person for, so on the one hand, Anthony, I get if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But on the other hand, aren't we trying to make things more efficient here and not, I mean, it makes, so if there's no issues with the cemetery commissioner, we still should be thinking about it, shouldn't we?
Do you want to say
Yes.
something, Alan?
No, I was agreeing with him, for efficiency's sake, if nothing else.
I think the point was around the rationale that's presented at town meeting or to the select board, like, why are we doing this?
Oh,
We're
that
not
was
doing
my
it.
point from the beginning, that we have some
Right.
criteria.
So we're not doing it for the sake of doing it, we're doing
Precisely.
it because it makes
I was
sense for
actually
these
suggesting
reasons.
that we have some,
Right,
from the get-go, we just
Absolutely.
don't take pulse check and see what we want to do in this one, that we actually have some
yeah. that's-
basis for making recommendations. There's an issue,
Yeah.
it's not functioning well, it's not competitive. So I would think top of the list would be, it's not been competitive in the past. That would be I think an important, if it's been competitive, I wouldn't think we'd want to touch it. I wouldn't think we'd want to touch it.
There's also consideration with the cemetery commission is whether you need it or not.
Whether,
Not appointed or elected, but just whether it's efficient
Because
to
the
have it.
commissioner isn't the person who runs the day-to-day cemetery, right?
No,
No, right.
and it should come under DPW anyway, so there's their
And
concern.
there's several staff positions that also hold the title of the town XYZ. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but, you know, they also fill that role of, I'm doing something because the state requires it, but I'm paid by the town to do this other job too. So like, I think the tree warden is one and something else, like you have to have certain mandated positions, but they're often held by people doing another job.
any thoughts about any of that, Anthony or Mel?
Yeah, to your first statement, and I apologize for making this overly complicated. I think what I was trying to convey is, you know your community much better than we do, and so what I would say is, when you have an elected position, and you're thinking about turning it to appointed, I guess you want to sort of, if the scale is people really care about this, then you really want to have a really good rationale and sort of the things that I said before, or if it's something that, you know, there isn't that much interested in, and we think that it would be good for efficiency and it's not competitive, and you need less of a sort of strong, like there's a major proper fixing, then, you know, as you go up and down the scale. That's what I was really trying to convey there in terms of identifying problems, in terms of, in terms of, so. And then on the other thing about sort of the position is that, I forget who was speaking, but on the positions don't necessarily go away if you move a position, if you move one of these things from, the staff positions don't go if you move something from appointed to elected. In fact, for the cemetery, I think somebody mentioned, some of these things are already mandated in state law that the health department has to be involved in burial permits and things of that nature, and then you've got maintenance done by DPW. So it's, before you move the charter forward and fully implement the change, you probably do want to have them come in, understand what their roles and responsibilities are on the ground, not just on paper. And then if we need to tweak anything in our transition to make sure that we appropriately transition from the elected to the appointed, then we can put that in our transition section, if that's the route you want to go.
So, Anthony, if I read the longer Article 4 document right, that sort of serves to codify in the charter whatever decisions we are going to put forward. I wonder if we want to pause first and not get into the language of how it's written before we've had time to fully debate and discuss what we want to write about. Like, there seems like there's already a sort of first cut, perhaps, of positions that we would want to discuss further, like the Board of Assessors, the Housing Authority, the Cemetery Commission, and the Trust Fund Commissioner, just on the basis of what we've discussed already. Do we want to take a minute to kind of do a pros and cons and look at the criteria for those? Otherwise, we're sort of going into the nitty-gritty of the language without having really decided what it is we want.
But I also think it's helpful to see the language, because then that helps walk through what the impact of the change might be. So maybe if we go through the document and then do as you suggest, like which ones might we consider?
You mean in the section where it says, and the board will be responsible for blah, 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 blah?
Yeah, just a quick walk through this, because I think it's helpful just to hear how it will be laid out in the charter before we start.
But if there's no, I mean, I guess my sort of thought was if there isn't really any question about whether or not, for instance, the planning board will be elected or appointed, it's like pretty set. That's not a top priority for us to discuss in terms of shifting from elected to appointed. Do we want to at least just go through the document in order of priority?
Can do
I
that.
don't know if we'll get through
Yeah.
all tonight.
I mean, it's not a very long list.
I agree with Karen, though. I mean, I think we should read through the whole thing first, then go back and decide. No, let's read the language that's actually here, whether we agree on each. We start off talking about different boards. We're going to get to the cemetery. We're going to get to everything else. I think it'd be a good idea to read through it.
And I think we also had prioritized which committees we were going to bring in first, or which groups, which is why we're doing police and fire next week. And so we could reprioritize the rest based on
Right.
what you learn.
Okay, we can do this. I think as we get into this, it's kind of boilerplate. I mean, this is, you know, it is elected or it's this and that, so, but it won't take, let's do it quickly.
Okay.
You know, this is just a draft anyway.
Yeah, right.
So I will start. So again, this is really just the starting point of discussion, so you guys have something to look at. So all of this stuff is really up for grabs. As was explaining, you'll see this further on. There's some text in red. Some of it are just notes of things that, you know, as we were putting this together, we were just going to raise for the committee to discuss. Some of the things we identified may not be important to you, and there may be things we didn't identify that are important to you. So you're not held to what's in red. You know, the committee can discuss or raise anything that it wants to. So I'll go through this quickly. The first section is kind of boilerplate to cover all of the elected boards. Just identifying, for example, all of the, it's not just boards, but it's also positions. All the boards and positions that are elected, going to be elected in the town. Again, the red mark is here as we discussed the Water and Light Commission. The general eligibility for these positions, including, you know, the things we talked about a little bit earlier, having to be a resident of the town, which is required of state law, and things of that nature.
So Anthony, can I ask a question I have on, because you talk about any voter shall be eligible. So they have to have a voting record? They have to have been a voter before, or do they have to be a resident?
You know, this does say any voter. I can change that to resident. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be any voter.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just make a note of that.
Like that change.
Was it any resident or any eligible?
Resident.
So my daughter could run?
Yeah, it's true. And, yeah, right, that's true. And that's not any resident, so it's got to be an eligible resident or something,
Any eligible voter.
right?
She gets more friends than whatever.
Boy, what a bunch of nitpickers, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, but, you know,
Words are important.
there they are.
Of course.
It's a document. I know, it is amazing when we start reading something. It's like, what about this? What about that?
Isn't there some exclusions in state law about who can hold these positions?
Probably. Felons and things like that, gets into things like that, right? I don't know.
Is there a definition of
actually, let
voter
me-
some- Is there a definition of voter somewhere,
Is it registered voter?
Anthony?
Let me see. I'm trying to go to our sort of, we have a full tracking version of the charter. Let me just see. I don't believe so. We usually sort of refer to the one under state law, the language. So in the, which would have been circulated a couple weeks ago, we call sort of the total document, the full draft charter. Voters is defined as registered voters of the town of Littleton. So it's a little bit self-referential, but that's kind of standard language.
So if we make that a defined term, capital V, voter, and or whatever, however you, would you tell me again what that definition read? How did it read?
It reads, voters is defined as any registered voters of the town of Littleton.
Okay, so if you're not a registered voter,
2 more years.
guess you have to get registered, or you have to be registered, but I mean, not that hard to get registered, right? That's not a big deal. Just leave it.
Then leave it.
I would almost question someone running for office.
If it's never voted, yeah, it's not a voted, then that's a problem too. I was thinking, I actually thought of that too, yeah, right, yeah. All right, we'll just leave it voter, we'll just keep it moving.
Yep, move it on.
We'll actually look into that too. I think that I think that, you know, age is a requirement for voting, but I actually think in many places some places do not prohibit you to run. I think you can run when you're younger than 18. I can't think of places. Am I right about that, Mel, or am I making that up?
But
I know as a
don't think-
voter, you have to be 18.
Well, there are communities that don't restrict it to voters. They may restrict it to age or something, but if you're not a citizen of the United States, you wouldn't be a registered voter, for example, or anyone who just chooses not to register to vote, or somebody may live part-time in the town, things like that.
Now the other thing, just before I get off of the eligibility section, we're not there yet. We're going to get to a section on citizen participation, which usually includes a section on recall. You passed relatively recently. You passed a recall provision in Littleton. When was this adopted? So passed in 2006. There was a recall provision for elected officials in Littleton that was passed as a special act. So that, in some ways, affects the. We'll discuss this later, but I'm just saying it kind of affects the eligibility provision in terms of vacancies and things of that nature.
All right, can you forward that to the team, Anthony, that recall provision, just so we have it?
I can circulate that around.
Thank you.
We will get to that. As we
I
get to the
know, but
chart.
just so we have it. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll.
And then I have to clean up some of the stuff about the filling of vacancies. Usually it's by the select board. In fact, some of these particular provisions have the select board in there. And then the last one, just in this general section on compensation, these elected officers not compensated.
You're ahead of me, so can we go back to, again, I'm going to do wordsmithing again, sort of, but for 4.1c, you talk about town council, vote of the town
Yeah, that
council,
should be
and president of the
select.
town council.
Yeah, that should be select board.
Yeah, it should be.
So
Okay.
I'll be clear. So I'll
I just want to make sure
clean
you
that up.
had it to fix, yep.
And on the compensation, we touched on that already. They're not, by default, they're not compensated unless the town meeting votes to make these compensated positions. Quickly, as I said before, in the chart, it comes up as non-competitive. That's true in honestly most communities. So this is pretty standard language for the town moderator. 3-year term with the power really to preside over the town meeting. We're going to reference the section 1, about how they sort of regulate the town meeting because we had some language there. But this is pretty standard for a town moderator. So I'll just keep going unless somebody raises an issue. The same thing for the town clerk. Again, for most towns, these are elected. There is somewhat of a shift to making these appointed. But this is pretty standard language for your current structure where you have an elected town clerk, serves a term of 3 years, and is in charge of, the things that are really required under state law for the town clerk.
Never mind, make sure we go through the
I'm sorry.
document first and then talk about the positions after. Okay.
Or as we go.
Or as we go, what do you think? You want to talk about
Okay.
positions as we go? I mean, that one to me is interesting just in terms of this chart here, in terms of the work, right? The hands-on work and what you need to do and all that kind of stuff. It definitely points more towards appointed than elected.
One of my criteria that I was thinking of for adding to the why you would appoint a position would be the subject matter expertise. So you wouldn't want to just, anyone could get elected, right?
Right, exactly.
Your daughter could,
Right. Wouldn't make a very good town clerk.
She'd be
That's
awesome.
on the record, so if she watches this.
She'd be awesome. I'd vote.
Yeah, I find this one hard as well because when Diane was in here, I think you made a very compelling argument for why it should maintain an elected position that I felt was very persuasive. But if I was just looking at it on paper, and just looking at the roles and responsibilities and the criteria, so I find it's hard to sort of reconcile those, and also I imagine that would be a contentious change, or potentially a big change that people would say, well, why when everything is working so well? So.
Especially
if
since she's not in favor of it, so, and she's
Right,
very
and
well
so if we
respected.
end
right?
up with a
Right.
sort of prioritized list,
Yep.
even though I can see objectively there's a really good rationale for just making that an
Mhm.
appointed position, I think we'd want to be careful where we, like if we're going to put all our eggs in a few baskets. You know,
Right, no,
where we want to-
that'll be one, I agree with you, the politics would be criteria, but it's, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, again, we've had such good, amazing town clerks.
Yeah. Thinking back 20 years ago, when I had the Town Government Study Committee, we went through this position over and over again, just like we're going to do right now, with the rationale that it would make sense to have an appointed person because you're going to get somebody you know that's qualified as opposed to being elected. But then we also talked about a balance of power. There's the town clerk, in a lot of ways, should be separate from a town manager or a town administrator because their role is different. They have to abide by certain things. If it's an appointed office and that town clerk has to follow the authority of a town administrator or a town manager, are there opportunities in the future where that town manager, and I'm not talking about our town manager, I'm talking in general, would come down and say, I want this posted even though it's 3 days late because I want it in there. That's just a small example. So there are things like that that you have to consider. And we have been lucky. Since I was a kid, we've gone through like maybe 3 or 4 town clerks that have been phenomenal. But there's no promise that it's going to be that way.
Rob?
So I agree with the comments I just heard in terms of, I thought, a very persuasive argument presented by Diane Corey, the town clerk. And I agree with Joe, what you just said as well. I just want to emphasize, though, those 2 points that I'm in agreement with what I heard. Very convincing as far as I'm concerned. Part that I'd like to add on to the list is the aspect with regard to the expertise. From my interaction with a number of personnel, whether it's the assessor's office or the town clerk's office, the training that they go to on a routine basis in order to become the professionals that they are, to give the service that they give, to perform the duties that we ask of them, is quite significant. So in that regard, I'm not as persuaded by the aspect of getting a professional element as a result of, having it be appointed. I feel like it can be elected, and an elected person, in order to perform the duties, goes through a sequence. Or maybe we should inquire as to what do you, as a part of your performance of your duties, are there certain standards, much like we heard Jim Duggan in previous meetings discuss elements with regard to rights for acquiring and paying bills and all of those things, sophisticated with regard to compliance with regulations. So I just want to bring out that element that I think is a structural existence within the town clerk position that we should consider.
I just think it's also, there's a lot of day-to-day work that gets done in that job. And if you've got someone who's elected, so now they don't have a boss, effectively, right? They work for the citizens, but they're in there for 3 years, and so, they don't take it that seriously. They don't do that good of a job.
I was just gonna ask
And they leave early every day or something like. They do it as a part-time
So
job.
what's the-
They're not accountable. They don't have a boss. What do you do?
Right.
It's an integral part of the town. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you make a good point. I have tremendous respect for Diane.
Oh, yeah.
And I think she has her reasons why she wants it to remain elected. No question with that. But I think we wouldn't be doing our job as a charter committee if we didn't look at the arguments in favor of an appointed position. And
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
I think if
Stop. It won't stop.
I hate to, I think if you apply
Thank you.
these criteria to the town clerk position, say appointed, I'm sorry, I have to.
you make a good point, and I think Charlotte might have alluded to it. One of the criteria is that someone with little training or expertise would have significant difficulty performing the work effectively. Well, no kidding. It's like, and why would you run for town clerk, knowing that it's a complicated position, requires more and more specialized knowledge? The incumbent is,
Or maybe not knowing it's a complicated position.
well, no, we're lucky that,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there's, nothing's broken, there's no compelling
Right.
reason for someone to run, but it's like, I think to me, it'd be discouraging competition, which is maybe why we don't see any. The rules are complicated, and there's no way to really evaluate the performance, to your point, of the individual. We're fortunate we've had outstanding performance, but it may not always be that way. And, and let's not forget, the town clerk is an employee of the town, is a department head, not accountable to the chief elected body
Right.
or anyone, really. I mean, kind of there's great opportunity for mischief. I mean, we've never had that here. And I'm not, but I think we've got to look at, to my knowledge, and Joe can, chime in. I don't think we've ever had a competitive election for town clerk. I'm going back 50 years. I don't think we've ever had one.
I don't remember one at all.
But I think with all of the committees and all the positions, if we can build in, and I forget who it was from the select board that talked about it, but how can they oversee fraud, waste, and abuse? Like, what are their controls? What are the checks and balances? How do we make sure we're not creating this silo that can go off and do whatever they want, or be beholden to somebody to do things that may not be in the best interest of the town? So we can do all
I
of
think I
that.
saw one of the, maybe it was Groton, I don't know, one of these things that I looked at, the town clerk was appointed, but they reported to the select board, not to the town
I was just
manager.
gonna say, that's another option
Well,
too. They don't have to.
Interesting
I know I
concept,
said
huh?
no
That gives
carve-outs.
some of that,
You can, you
I know
can
I said no
structure it
carve-outs,
however
but
you
yeah,
like.
yeah,
like the town,
Town council.
town council,
Mhm. right,
just a standalone.
okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Oh, and
And
Betsy-
obviously, we'll have, on the list of people to bring in, obviously, she's gonna be one.
Just one thing
Yeah,
I wanted
no.
to add. I mean, having been through this in another community, I think the only way to affect this change is if you have the support of the town clerk, and B, you do it at a time when the town clerk is either retiring or leaving office, so that you're not pulling the rug out from under
Right.
an elected person
Oh,
midterm.
that's true too.
Well, that's
Yeah.
also what I think that, and if I recall, Anthony and Mel said, like, that the charter can be phased in. and
Yeah,
say, like,
I'd raised that before.
Yeah, like
A
when-
transition plan.
Yeah,
when the next term comes up, it would come into effect,
Yeah,
not.
because you're not gonna,
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
the
yeah.
town's not gonna support something that the town clerk is
Right.
against.
Right, right,
Yeah.
Right.
okay,
But
that's all good stuff, go
if I
ahead.
could, I'd like to add, so we have this list, that we're all referring to. I think at some point, we might want to consider aspects of weighting with regard to, we've got a half dozen or more, evaluators, and weighting of them, for me, a la what Joe said earlier, checks and balance, yep. That's a
That's
big check
on-
and
it's on
balance.
here,
And
yeah.
so I
That's
just.
what- That's
I
what
wanna-
Kevin's saying too, to go through the
I
list.
want to bring that point out by
Yep.
way of, we may individually place different weighting with regard to which of these criteria we think are worthy of determining a decision, and we may disagree with regard to the weighting values that we give each of the criteria.
And maybe the way that we can also present this ultimately in our report would be like pros and cons, or sort of a clear record of our deliberations, and maybe a sort of majority recommendation, but noting that it wasn't clear, that it wasn't a cut and dry.
Or we're not fixing something that's broken, it's just
Yeah,
that
we'll just.
we're looking ahead and how things should be, and so,
document
right.
pros, cons, this way, that way, and then ultimately, we might recommend blah, 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 but again, it's up to them, the select board and the town meeting.
It might even require a special act at town meeting, over and above the charter. Maybe Anthony or Mel could speak to that, but it might require, a home rule act or a special act to change the nature of the clerk's position, especially if you were going to phase it in during an interregnum between an elected clerk that retires and the next clerk, being appointed. That might be some, I've seen it done that way, by a town meeting vote, but absent a charter, but.
Yeah, so some communities have changed that position via special act outside of a charter. Now, your charter is a special act. You're creating a legislation through special act. So it has the power to say, we want the town clerk or whatever position to be appointed rather than elected. And in the transition section, that's the last thing that we do when we draft this charter document. We can call out these specific positions and say, for this position, it won't take effect until after the current term's over, or, and I've seen this in some places, or until this person, the incumbent, retires, something like that.
Yep.
There's a number of different ways to structure that phase.
Okay. Board of Assessors? Do you want to move
Board of
on?
Assessors.
Okay.
This is also pretty standard language. So you have a 5-member Board of Assessors. They're elected to a term of 5 years. And actually, this is another, I always say this is another typo on mine. Because you have 5 members, it should be so arranged so that no more than 2 terms shall expire each year. To make sure that you're filling the position. So I'll do that. But then the powers and duties, again, very standard for Board of Assessors. They're creating the fair cash value for the purpose of setting the tax rate. So that's pretty standard language here. Oh, Mel, I see your hand up.
I think it's important. I was reviewing your bylaws, books and bylaws, while we're talking about the Board of Assessors. You do have a finance department that is created by by bylaw, but it doesn't. It allows, but does not require the assessor to be part of the administration, and it gives the Board of Assessors that option. To my knowledge, the Board of Assessors have not reached an MOA or anything like that. Does anybody know if the chief assessor, the staff person, is appointed by the town administrator or supervised by any way?
I'm almost
I
positive
have in
it's
my
supervised.
chart, the chief assessor is appointed by the town administrator and has a dual report to the board and the TA.
That's consistent with my understanding.
I think that's what it is.
Could you hear that?
No.
The chief assessor is appointed by the town administrator and reports to the board and the TA. So they've got the matrix report
Is that written somewhere?
in my spreadsheet.
But you have notes on there where that came from, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a variety of conversations.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that it's written in so many places, because we have numerous boards, and like Conservation Commission, has the conservation agent, interacting with them, but that person via the MOU reports to the town administrator. So there's a number of, it might be a difficult trail to follow the wording exact. I think a way, if we want to go, is ask Jim. He just convened a department head meeting earlier today. Who was there and who reports to him?
Well, as Anthony said, this special act charter, this charter is a special act, and so to the extent that you want to confirm or clarify existing practices, whether they are in the memorandum or through some other informal arrangement, this will be the time to do that. Now, we're going back to sort of the Article 3 or 6 administration. We're going to kind of go back and forth. But I did want to point out that currently the bylaws give the Board of Assessors the ability to cooperate or not. And if they are cooperating and allowing the town administrator to appoint or supervise the chief assessor, that's probably something we should incorporate within the charter.
What does your chart show for that, for the Board of Assessors? Is that what it says? Appointed by TA, but,
Yep.
Actually, better than I think.
Sorry about that.
okay.
Anything else on the Board of Assessors?
No. No.
Moving on to the Housing Authority, which is a sort of a very interesting, this is actually a very interesting one. So the Housing Authority is heavily regulated by state law. So for the most part, this section takes most of the parts of the state law and sort of just brings them into your charter, just to spell them out, particularly as it goes as regards to the election and appointment of members of this board, and generally without too much specifics, their powers and duties. When I was researching this, you have a section in the town bylaws about the housing authority. It cites to an incorrect section of state law. So that's just one thing sort of to note, to sort of clean up in the bylaws. It could be something to sort of be part of the report. And then I just wanted to ask, maybe this committee doesn't know, or you bring someone in, but to maybe consider. So under state law currently, and this is actually a relatively recent change, you've got the three elected members, the appointment from essentially the governor through the Office of Housing and Livable Communities, previously Department of Economic Development or something, and a tenant appointee. The tenant appointee, there's a whole process where they put together a list of eligible tenant appointees, and then the select board is allowed to appoint a member. I just wanted to sort of stop here, and does that comport with what you understand the current process to be, or do you think Littleton is doing things a little differently?
I don't know. Anybody here really know housing authority?
The housing authority in the past has always had a tenant representative, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
You have one of those and one from the state, and then three that,
Yeah, exactly.
Regular.
yeah.
And then I think we have a select board member that might be,
Matthew Nordhaus.
is he a member or is he just a liaison?
Oh, he's a voting member. I've attended a couple of the meetings, he's a voting member. I've also attended a meeting which a tenant was presented and, placed into the voting status. But I haven't attended in several months, so I can't state that that's the current situation, other than I believe Matthew still is serving.
That's what's on there.
He must be an elected member then. Because the board couldn't appoint him, he's not a tenant, so.
Yeah, but if you talk about a selectman,
Yeah, right. It says
So
the
he-
select board appoints a tenant to the board.
Sure, they're elected.
That's what the,
Yeah, so that's probably something that we want to just explore a little bit.
Yeah, we gotta find out about that.
So for this,
So under state law, there's a specific process, these numbers, three elected, one from the governor, one from the tenants, that's all articulated in state law. I did not find any special act that's exclusive to Littleton that would allow you to deviate from that. So again, it could be that you're doing things specifically under state law, or it could be that things have deviated maybe in practice for some reason. So we just want to explore that and make sure that it's either corrected in the charter or reflected in the charter, one way or the other.
So Betsy, I'd put out for consideration, one or two of us want to break off and contact Matthew to state we'd like clarification with regard to how the present makeup exists and how it compares to the matters that have been mentioned tonight, as opposed to another.
Sure, you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Be awesome. Yep, I know.
Just then logistics. So one question on the electoral competitiveness, that would only be reflected here for those three elected positions, right? So when we're talking about the fact that I think the Housing Authority has the most zeros in this line and the lowest competitive ranking, is there a question as to whether those three elected would ever be appointed if this is part of the makeup? It has to be the makeup, right? So even though those are not competitive, doesn't seem like there's the opportunity to change them to appointed. Am I getting that right?
Well, so I guess there's a couple levels for this one. So, the Housing Authority, heavily regulated by state law, very politically important, I guess. Now, you're creating a special act which allows Littleton to deviate from state law. So, in theory, you could propose something here that's different than what's in the state law act to apply to Littleton's Housing Authority. It would only apply to Littleton. There's the pros and cons here are obviously the local politics and all the things that are on the spreadsheet and the the criteria that you're looking at. But in addition to that, that could receive some pushback at the State House when they receive this from the from the town. I can look. I'm not aware of too many communities that heavily deviate from the prescribed state law housing authority setup, but we can look into that. And Mel, I saw your hand up again. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a town like Littleton is unlikely to get permission to deviate from the housing authority laws.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me to boil that down, at the state level, when it goes to the legislature, you would get more scrutiny and perhaps a rejection. I don't want to say that that's guaranteed.
I don't think the housing authorities is that critical of an issue here, or a controversial issue that we would have any reason to go against what the state says, from my standpoint, right?
Then it's a
Right.
separate.
Right.
Then the non-competitiveness of elections is a separate
Right.
issue.
In this case.
Yes.
In this
it's
case.
Sort of like, we might want to work on that, but it's independent of the charter. Yeah.
And the tenant position is vacant.
Okay.
According.
Tim?
No, and I'm just
Sorry.
guessing that the zeros may come up on the electoral spreadsheet because the Office of Housing Authority Commissioner doesn't appear on the ballot every year because they're only electing 3. Well, because there are 2 appointed members, and those years wouldn't be, they'd be appointed presumably in off years from
Right, there wouldn't
elections.
be anybody there, right?
So you're not going to have
Well,
5 in 5 years. You're going to have 3 in 5 years.
Well, I can double check if there's a number there. That means that there was an electable seat up and nobody ran.
A zero
I
as
can
opposed to a
double-check.
dash, which means it wasn't even on the ballot.
Correct. So I can double check, or we didn't have information.
Yeah, we didn't
So
have
I can go back and double check, but a zero means that we identified a potential election and there was no candidate.
Okay, what was that? You want to talk about what you
I just, I want you to find out, because I'm confused by this. In Chapter 13 about committees, Article 7, Housing Authority Committee, the town establishes a Housing Authority Committee pursuant to Mass General Law 123 and Section 26 to consist of 5 members to be appointed by the Select Board, which is completely different from what,
I think that was the original housing authority when it was created in the early 70s. I think before it got to the ballot stage that the
That's what it
select board
was.
had to put a committee in place. And that's why it was done that way, to kind of jumpstart the committee. That's just a guess, but
it's not a bad guess, but it's, if you just look at our bylaws, that's what it says.
yeah, it's clearly not what's done now.
Just
But
another
There's also
reason why
the
we need to do
housing
this.
authority, and then there's the affordable housing trust. So 2
says-
separate
Which is
things
select
with
board, yeah.
similar names.
Right, yeah. Kind of like Conservation Commission, Conservation Trust, yeah. Confusing, but yeah, okay. All right, this is good. This is important stuff. Why we're doing this. Okay, so, all right, so Rob's gonna find out some information on that for us. All right, library?
Moving on to the Board of Library Trustees. Again, this one's pretty standard. You've got a 5-member elected Board of Library Trustees over 3 years with some portion of the terms coming up for each town election. Their powers and duties are to basically manage the libraries, the library property, the funds related to libraries, and things of that nature. One thing that I didn't put here, but I guess I wasn't sure where the conversation went in terms of appointing authority, but you could add a language here around the Board of Library Trustees appointing the library director. And I think that there was still some discussion around how much that you were going to allow certain boards and committees to still appoint their direct staff. So that's kind of up for conversation.
Yep. that's a good
And Mel,
one.
if you want to add anything onto that.
No, just that, I think you have to, the general law that authorizes library trustees is not that clear. I think most people assume that it's appointed by the library trustees. In most communities with an elected board, it is, but it's not required. And that is something we can talk about. I would say that if the library trustees are opposed to it, it makes it difficult to do that, I think, not unlike any other elected board, given the politics of that.
think that's a discussion. Isn't that one that is MOU to the TA?
There is no MOU to our knowledge with library trustees.
Okay.
But that's one of the ones we had on the list to bring in.
What difference would
Okay.
it make if they didn't appoint their own director? How much would they oppose that or not?
That would be one of the ones, if they're against it, that would be very tough
Yeah.
to libraries.
I'll just
Well-
point out, in item A, there's another one of no more than 2 instead of 1.
Right. For the last sentence there. Anthony, it's, so arranged that one term shall expire each year versus no more than.
Yeah,
Or at
yeah,
least
I
no more than two.
just took a note to update, to be no more than 2, yeah.
Yep.
Do you
Okay,
want me to move on, or any more discussion here?
I think so. Next.
The next one is the planning board. Again, the planning board, heavily regulated by state law, so this is actually all very standard language. You've got the planning board consisting of 5 members, the term of office expiring. I think this one actually is, it also has to be updated for at least 2, at least, so it's structurally a bit different. At least 1 member is elected at each regular election, so there can be more than 1, 2, but there has to be someone on each election in
But-
terms of the term of office.
Okay.
And then there's the powers and
Well,
duties.
can
Again,
you just go back to that, though? Why is that worded differently than they have to expire, so many expire at the end of 1 year? Why is that different?
Isn't it 5-year terms?
It's the other ones we talk about in terms of expiring as opposed to being elected.
You know what, that's on me in terms of the somewhat sloppy drafting. I can, at some point, I'll harmonize to say all of these, to have the language all be the same, but
And it
this
should
is,
be the expires, not the being elected, I think, because of if people don't fulfill their role, and then you have other people being elected at certain times. So I think it makes sense to say there is set up so that 1 or 2 have to expire every year, rather than saying how many are being elected every year.
well, I would say the most common way you see it is the number to be, the number to be elected versus expired.
Okay, then it just has to be worded, because you could say there will be 1 every year. Well, there may be 2, because somebody may have dropped out of their position, and so they're voting for 2 people. There's 2 positions open, so the wording just has to accommodate that.
Yeah, so I can go back and tighten this up.
All right. It should
Yeah.
just be
But
consistent.
I mean, yeah, to be consistent
It
across all
says
the
at
different
least,
sections.
at least 1.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you can word it that way, but some of them are not worded, so I just want to make sure it's right. Okay, all right, keep going.
Yeah, so
That's not
That's
that
correct.
important.
I'll throw in the consistency.
Yep.
That there's also phrasing in here with regard to until successors have been sworn, as opposed to until successors have been qualified. I mean, there's just inconsistent language
Yep.
on that point as well.
Yeah, and that's on me. I'm just putting something together for the committee to consider, but yes, that's correct.
Okay,
The powers and duties, again, most of the planning board's powers and duties are really heavily articulated in state law. So this sort of just references that. And then just for the committees, note there's a reference basically to the planning board in your existing bylaws, which would have to be modified, to make sure that all the parts that are in the charter are removed from the bylaw, so that there's no possibility for conflict.
yep.
The next one is the Board of Parks and Recreation, 5 members. Again, I know this, so we don't have to go through there's the terms have to be sort of harmonized, but 5 members, 5-member board with arranged in such a way so that they appear on every annual election. Articulate the powers and duties, basically control over all the sort of recreation activities in town. You can tweak this language, but this is generally what I see across most communities in terms of the authority for the Parks and Recreation Department, Parks and Recreation Commission. I would say that you probably would only want to change these powers and duties if there's something really uniquely different that your Board of Parks and Recreation does that you don't see here. And again, just a reference to the reference in the bylaws that will just have to be harmonized with if the charter were to pass. So the kind of go on.
Well, and also appointing the director also on this one, right? Just like the library. Right now, they appoint their director, correct? Yep, you do.
Right. There is a memorandum agreement with Park and Recreation Commission.
Hey, Anthony, this language, should we be calling out assets that the town currently doesn't have, such as a town pool?
Yeah, take that stuff out.
Place it with the lake, Long Lake.
I'm just curious, like, if we put that in a charter, what, does it make sense to have that language? If it doesn't-
No, we can remove that. Yeah, we can remove that.
More vague.
It doesn't need to be an exhaustive list, or can it just be?
No, it's meant to be examples and not an exhaustive list of all the assets.
So I find myself challenged by that, because if it's indicative of a generality, and yet I would argue Long Lake Beach is one of the significant responsibilities entrusted, and it's not mentioned.
Okay, so
and
we-
should it be? So
Yeah.
we start this laundry list of ding, 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 and the future in a charter is supposed to be
Well,
comprehensive. So I think we're in a bit of a catch-22, and I look.
I mean, these are pretty generic terms, playing fields, parks, public lawns, I mean,
It's meant to be. It is meant to be categories of recreation activity and not specific town assets.
Public lakes.
Yeah, I think the statement, all property of the town,
Okay.
would be there too.
Yeah.
covers everything else.
Some of this is dovetailing and not so well as a puzzle piece in my mind. We've discussed determination of meeting room allocation, utilization, and parks and Littleton Common. I mean, so how is that all going to fit together with regard to centralizing one-stop shopping with regard to the public coming in versus this would be a continuation of, you have to differentiate what your request is to go and.
yeah, but that's operational to me, where this is governance.
Okay, but the governance would dictate a separate path. The way this language reads, I think, would dictate a separate path. Board and Recreation shall general charge and management. That says Mother May I has to go to Park and Recreation Commission. That's the way I would read that. And that's why I'm bringing it in. We've had, I view, conflicting conversations that at some point we're going to have to discuss and wrestle out which one is going to.
And part of the discussion here is, does the director report to the commissioners or to the
That's just
town
that's
manager?
enough.
If they report to the town manager, now you've got a direct line again.
So it's
Right.
another aspect of how I'm just trying to
Right.
point out the relative inconsistencies. We move from one discussion to another, and we can't lose sight of the fact that either they fit or we got to park them for a discussion at another time.
I'm not sure I guess I'm not sure exactly what it is that's bothering you right now, because for this, I get, this is, all these things we're going to discuss further and have them come in and talk more, but,
I thought previously we discussed some centralization of responsibility.
yeah.
Okay, this would be a direct exception to that.
Not if the director ends up reporting to the town manager, it doesn't.
If the Board of Commission that is elected Board of Commissioners is empowered with regard to this statement, I would argue that the reporting relationship.
Okay, now I see what you're saying. So you're talking about the commissioners now, if they have control over all this, then that's a difference. Okay, now I get it. That's what I was trying to get to, Rob. Thank you.
Okay, okay.
I do think it does bring us to that, what does it mean to sort of have power over, right? Does it mean you are accountable for the maintenance? Does it mean you are the one approving requests to lease for the day? Does it, like, what are we divvying up in responsibilities? And there does seem to be a sort of overall accountability, setting policy for, management of, which might be distinct from some sort of centralized operational system for, I mean, just using those as an example, we don't have to conflate them. They can be separate.
They could, but it would require, if something's in black and white, you're going to deviate from that through you're going to have to either identify that as a term of what does the word power, I mean, we're starting down a trail here, I think, of how many documents do you have to refer and then refer in order to understand. Not saying that's where we're at, not at all. I'm just saying that I think there's something here that we need to chew on at a future time.
And we haven't got there yet, but one point you make is it possible to have the elected commissioners still be responsible for all that, but the head of the department directly reports to the town manager?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the current language does, and we can, I guess, beef this up. If I'm understanding the concern correctly, it's in the, in Article, I'm forgetting the article now, in Article 2, or maybe it's Article 3, we gave the town manager a lot of authority around managing of town property and things of that nature. There's a clause in the sentence that we're looking at which says, in coordination with the town administrator. We could, and we don't have to do the wordsmithing now, but we could, if you want to boost the language or modify the language in such a way that we emphasize that really it's the town manager that is in charge of all town property, I can craft some language between now and the next meeting to further emphasize that, if you think that language is not strong enough.
Is it inherent to a board or a commission that they are advisory? Would it make sense to say the commission advises on, or
Good point.
like they're not in charge the same way that other roles are in charge? So they set, like, again, come back to that chart, they're setting policy on how things can be used, but not necessarily saying, yes, Saturday at 10 a.m.,
So I agree with that, and that's why I feel like, that's why we need to have Park and Rec commissioners and PRCD leadership be invited and participate in order to understand from their perspective their roles, so that we can consider how it's working right now and ask the questions.
And they've asked to come, so it's just a matter of us getting the time.
So it's a difficult,
Yeah.
it's a difficult situation to be into this conversation prior to hearing from them, in my opinion. Although the points are well taken, I just think we're going to have to get there at a later date.
Again, depending on the outcome of those conversations, have this paragraph be much more around advising and sort of will advise on policy, pertaining to these facilities, whereas you put more of the square, like operational management, under the TM.
Which is not what this says now.
Right.
Powers and duties, they shall conduct.
Right. That would have to
Right.
change. So
Yeah.
maybe a note to revisit that once we have those.
Or not, yeah, or not. Or maybe not. Maybe this is the way it needs to be. We don't know yet. Okay, good point. Thank you.
By the way, almost one of the most, maybe the second most competitive, second or top three competitive elections, right?
During the Park and Rec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Maybe because it's more easily understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to get involved. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like assessor or
Yeah.
park and
But that probably says something, the fact that it's so competitive.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
But I think you make a good point. I'm sitting here contemplating all of this, thinking, wait a minute, strong town manager, that means has responsibility for the day-to-day operations of the town. Not boards,
Right.
not committees, the town manager. There's collaboration and dotted lines and boards that give, the personnel board talks to the personnel director, and the FinCom talks to finance. So anyways. And
On the other hand, this is also one, people are vested in this,
Oh,
right? And so trying to
yes,
change,
yes.
there's got to have a good, there's got to be,
Yeah.
right?
But it seems to me some point, part of our explaining to people is around which our general direction is going to be, is that we think that as this town matures and is at this point making a huge transition in many respects, we've got to move toward a more professionally operated day-to-day functionality within this town, with good input from volunteers and good-hearted citizens for checks and balances. But generally speaking, we're talking about day-to-day operations. I think, at least I am, talking about day-to-day operations under people who are qualified to do those jobs, and a town manager, or whatever you call that thing up there, who's very capable in the many aspects of town government administration.
Okay, good.
Totally agree, Kevin. I think that's why I would love to hear from, like, let's say the Parks and Rec
Oh, yeah.
Commission. What do they currently do? Like, as in, like, what do they want to hold on to? Because I imagine they may hear that and go like, yes, yes, you know, or they may have, you know, some comments on it. But I think it would be really nice to see how they perceive their role as a commissioner or as a board versus what we're describing in terms of that management. Yeah.
I agree with that, but at some point, we've got to have some high-level guiding premises as we move forward and explain ourselves.
Yeah.
And everybody we've talked to so far says, don't mess with my current construct. Everyone we've talked to, and I expect will talk to, will say, don't mess with the current construct. And we've got to take that under advisement and and I think we're charged with looking at things like these criteria and where is this town going and what's the best construct for as we grow up and things like that. So we're gonna have some tough recommendations to make along the way, but we should have some guiding principles, it seems to me.
And that way also it takes some of the personality out of it. Like, we made our decision, it's not based on because this or that, it's here's it just because it falls into the construct that we put in. And that takes some of that stuff out of it too, right? It's not personal, it's not directed at any one person or any one group, right?
And that probably the thing was, this is an evolving town. This is not a static town.
No, it's definitely not.
This is an evolving town.
That's right.
And as we evolve,
Right.
and we see other towns evolving,
Yeah.
and we can look to them as, well, perhaps case studies. And as we evolve, we've got to look at different ways of doing things.
When was it you did the last one? Was it 20 years or 30 years ago?
2006.
2006, I was it?
2006,
ago.
2007.
Okay. When I first moved here in 93 or 94, it was a one-stoplight town, just so you know. So. One stoplight town. So it's changed a little bit.
Where was the start?
Okay? It was that
Can I just add that in many
119,
cases,
110.
can I just add that in many cases, including this Board of Park and Recreation Commission, there is currently a memorandum of agreement. So I think you'd want to have that and ask these boards that have entered into these agreements that why would you not support that going forward? Because effectively, a lot of these memorandum of agreements relate to the town administrators' control over the department head.
Yeah, I still view those almost in some respects as two different things, because you're still talking about the day-to-day operation. There's still who's appointing who. And that's a change. Even if they support the MOU.
But in some cases, they're not appointing them, they're just saying, we appointed this person, now you manage
Right,
them.
I know, right. Right.
But we want to keep our power of appointment.
Okay, good stuff. All right,
Moving on.
you done with that one for now? All right,
There's been a lot of prologue, but now we're going to go to the Board of Light and Water Commissioners. So this is the only one where I structure it in a way that's different than the way you currently operate. So the way you currently operate, these would be their own sections, one for the Board of Light Commissioners, one for the Light and Electric Commissioners, one for the Board of Water Commissioners. Or I created a combined section for just one board, combined board of light and water. Before I sort of go through the different parts of it, I just want to do a little bit of level setting. So Littleton has a custom water board. So you have a special act initially passed in 1911, modified in 1995, creating your Board of Water Commissioners. So it's not under state law, it's custom to Littleton. The light department operates under a state law, so there's a state provision about municipal light plants, and so it operates under that. So that state law covers the electric and light portion of what the city provides. So, there's the usual things around. You've got a board of 5 members. They're elected from the voters. They got a 3-year term with a certain number to be filled at each municipal election. And then there are 2 sections defining the different roles as both a light and water department. So to keep things simple for the first part, we're pulling from the state law around municipal light boards and basically references that whole chapter saying that this board has all the authority of a municipal light board under this section or the chapter of state law. And then the second section, I excerpted the most relevant portions of your special acts that talk about the authority of the water board to set the water rate and do a number of other things. So this one's a little unique in that it's in some ways sort of a mushing together of these various provisions of law to create this board that has all the authority that it seems like the town wants it to operate in. So that's, in some ways this is the most complicated one, but to make it simple, it's you're basically, this would take over, so this would get rid of the other special acts, and all the authority that was granted through them is put here in the charter to give that to the board the power of the water commission of the water board, and we cite to the state law to say that this board has all the power of a municipal light plan, so that it has all the authority that it's supposed to have. So I'll stop here and I'll turn it over to you for questions.
So I guess I'll start. I'm a little bit concerned with regard to the brevity of C and the length of D, and yet I understand, if I understand correctly, he's trying to do it so we get out of those two original acts that were created. Assuming that's correct, Joe, I might put it out there with regard to, should this potentially go to Nick and the water commissioners with regard to this proposed language D, and I thought I was very impressed with Nick's articulation with regard to the separate acts that created light and water, and therefore I'd feel comfortable or feel good hearing from Nick's perspective and discussion with the water commissioners if they felt that item D reflected those meaningful parts of the original special act that would then get us out of the special act reference and get us into a proposed charter. Just throw that out as a possible way to go forward.
As I read through this today, and I just saw this, like you said, hours ago, I'm definitely going to bring it to our next meeting. I'm going to bring it to Nick and have our town council
I was going to say that.
take a look at it.
Yeah. I'd throw that out. If you're going to do that anyhow, then I think I'm glad to hear that you're going to do that. I think that would be meaningful input.
Okay.
Similar question, there was a lot of what seemed kind of complicated stuff in there about how the water commission could use the profits and this and that, but is that sort of standard language? Does that come as a surprise? Does it need to be that detailed in the charter? Or is that, Anthony, just moving everything over so that it is clarified? Because it seemed like a level of detail that was kind of more than we've been putting in the
I would
charter.
imagine some of that is because they're combined with electric and they have to be very separate, right? Because electric, they have to be separate.
I'm guessing they're probably trying to separate it. You say exactly what the water commissioners do, but I do want to make sure that that's reviewed by like water.
Like it says, you can't use the profits to do this until you've done that, and you can't change the water rates until you've done this. And it just seemed like a lot of specificity
In the charter.
in a charter. But I was, curious if that just would have to be in there if we're going to do this consolidation.
Yes.
Okay.
So two things to that point. So actually, so the first one around this chapter in terms of the municipal light is actually very large, several pages. It's part of state law, so it's very safe, and the state law changes very frequently, so it's very safe to sort of just reference all the authority that this board has as a municipal light board by just referencing the chapter of state law. For the water authority, Littleton has a special act, which means the legislature, probably at the behest of Littleton, created a law specifically to Littleton. So it's not in any other general laws or anything of that nature. You have a law specifically for your town that allows you to have this water board. So and you are correct, this is more detailed than other parts of the charter, because I wanted to take all of what I read through to be the important sections around the things that the board does and plug them into the charter so that you still have a clear reference for those authorities, because the charter will take the place of, is taking the place of all the prior special acts, so that a person can read this and not have to reference and find special acts in the past. So that's one of the reasons why it's so, why there's so much language here. But this is, for the most part, verbatim pulled from the original special act.
But not to say that going forward, maybe our recommendation is it's not all here, but there is a bylaw and something else gets added, and to make sure it's all covered, but not necessarily in this. Because it's not consistent with how we're doing the other ones, right?
The other, not.
I would say, I think it's a good idea to have the council for the Light and Water sort of look it over. And I would, because again, you're exercising authority that's exclusive to Littleton that was granted to the state. You're going to continue to exercise. I would, for this particular section, because you're not referencing any other state law or any other authority that maybe other communities might have, but you probably want to be a little bit more verbose here than in other places.
All right, that's good. That's why you're here. Tell us that stuff.
I
Yep.
don't mean to add on to Joe's burden and with other commissioners and town council, but sewer has been a topic that is a unique add-on, if you will. I would encourage that consideration as well, because I don't see any language pertaining to that, and yet I think we inherently, or at least I am, I'll say, am.
Good point. It is part of the water department right now.
So it needs to space on out. Yeah, good point. Okay?
Okay. So the next section is on the cemetery commission. Again, this one's really fairly standard. You've got a 3-member cemetery commission, terms expiring at each annual election, and this one's sort of more generalized. There's a section of state law around cemetery commissions, but I didn't cite it specifically, that they have all the authority granted to them by the state under state law. So that one's pretty straightforward.
Do the towns in your catch basin there, similar towns, most of them have cemetery commissions?
They do, let me get back to on that. I didn't sort of, let me see if I pulled that one out in another. I don't think I'm looking at some of my notes here. I didn't sort of pull out a graph on that. I don't think that most of them have. I don't want to speak without having looked at it thoroughly.
All right, then you can let us know next time.
Betsy, is your question commission versus commissioners?
The commission, having an overall commission. The commissioners on a, not, I mean, obviously you're gonna have somebody running the day-to-day, but having actually this overseeing commission.
Yeah, so Anthony, it says that shall have the, the duties conferred upon it by general law. What does general law require?
So there's a state, I don't know if I still have the reference, but there's a specific state law about cemetery commissioners around, well, I don't want to, I can send it to you, I can send the citation with the link to the citation state law where you can read it, but there's a section of state law around cemetery commissions and sort of what they do. It's pretty broad relative to the operation of cemeteries in the town. Municipal cemeteries, not private ones.
And it's also interesting because you mentioned earlier too about how the Board of Health has a say with the cemeteries, right? But they're not mentioned here anywhere. And if that's in fact a given connection, then that needs to be mentioned here as well.
The burial plots, you mean?
Whatever it is.
Well, yeah, they have under state law some requirements under license. So, I mean, I want to be careful because I don't have the specific numbers for your question that you're asked, but all communities do not have cemetery commissions. They may be managed in other ways. But you would, generally for the Board of Health, they've got some responsibilities around, in the same way that the town clerk, they do death certificates. They may have to sign off on, the town clerk may have to sign off on certain burial certificates, the way that they run it. That's not necessarily a charter issue. That's just their state law. They each have different responsibilities on the permitting path for those things. But let me make it up. So I will forward to the body the citation for the Cemetery Commission in state law. And we can, it's not always necessary, but we can cite to the specific statute in the language as well, if that's what the committee wants to do. So the Board of Health Commissioners, very similar. You've got a 5-member Board of Health Commissioners, terms expiring with 3-year terms. Those terms expiring, at least having one, and at most 2 expiring or being elected at every annual town meeting or town election. They have responsibilities that again come mainly from state law, but you can also have sort of your provisions in your bylaws that would sort of govern the things they can do relative to health and safety. And I think this is the last one yet. The Board of Commissioners of Trust Funds. So you've got a 3-member body that is elected has a 3-year term, where it's structured in such a way that at least one seat comes up for election at every annual election. This is also articulated under state law. And she emailed me some of the citations. So we just cite to the state law. One interesting thing here is that of your comparator communities, and I did this here, is that most of them don't have this board. 2 do, Groton and Townsend. And again, you can look at the competitiveness charts to see how competitive these elections are. But again, there's not too much here. That's
Yeah, the one more thing that the trust fund commissioners do here is part of one of the trust funds is scholarships. And they have there's a whole scholarship committee under there who determines who gets those scholarships and so on. Right now, that rolls up into this trust fund commission. But
we can add language like that to, well, it talks about, because it talks about them managing the gifts that are given to them. But if you want to spell that out in terms
I don't know.
of
I'm just mentioning that's something else that's included in their duties right now. I think this will be an interesting discussion. Find out more. Yep.
And maybe why the other towns still have them. I mean,
Right.
saw Groton on there. It's okay, that maybe makes sense given some large gifts they probably managed within Groton. But maybe if there's an actual rationale for it, it makes sense to keep it. But it doesn't seem to be very competitive.
Well, it's another one, and I'm one of these, by the way, for full disclosure. So, but I mean, it's like if you go to the one where it says, "Do people really understand what this is?" And most people don't know we exist. and the voting is usually somebody's going off, and so you find somebody else and you have to tell them either get your name on the ballot or tell all your friends to do a write-in, one or the other. So it's definitely one of those. So, and it's also definitely one of those where you kind of need to have people have some kind of a financial background of some sort to come into it and so on.
I'd heard about the scholarship fund, but I actually also had no idea it was managed by the trust fund.
Right, because there's also trust for the cemetery and for the library and for others. So schools have a trust fund. There's trust funds there too. So.
Is there a downside to having those positions appointed?
No, I think it's just that again, you want to kind of select who's going to be appointed as opposed to elected.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Because effectively they are now. It's just, I mean, that's what we're saying.
Just coming back to that earlier conversation on the effort it takes to run an election and to
Right.
be sort of...
Right, so then people would say, yeah,
and
I'll do
maybe
it,
there
but...
are more, I think Kevin, you made the point, maybe there are many more people who would actually like to serve,
Right.
but wouldn't want to run an election for something like that,
Yeah. So, anyway. Okay.
I wanted to, so that's the end. I just wanted to, Mel, I don't know if you had any thoughts or anything you wanted to share about having these types of funds managed by the town directly versus this Board of Commissioners. I don't know if you had any thoughts that you want to share about that.
Well, I just think that because it's in state law and it's authorized and the town has had a board, if you don't want this board, I think it's important to define it somewhere in the charter who will have responsibilities for these. If it's a library trust fund, will it be the Board of Library Trust Fund, cemetery, etc. Right now, as I understand it, regardless of whose jurisdiction the services, if there's a trust fund, they will be responsible for managing those funds.
Where's the accounting and tracking and reporting and for all of this? The finance?
It goes through the town, but the investments are with an outside firm.
Got it.
Yeah, these are all funds of the town, and so you'll see those on the ledger and in the audit every year.
So the current treasurer is not a voting member of the trust fund commission, but she attends all our meetings, she's part of it, so.
But if we were to consider transition from elected to appointed, the appointed by default, unless we would otherwise say, would go to the select board with regard to
Or
appointment.
town manager, how do you decide?
Okay, so I'm asking that question in order to
Right.
understand where the decision tree would be.
I get, yeah, that's a good point.
Because I kind
There's
of,
really no town manager, there's no, like, you wouldn't want the day-to-day, there's no day-to-day management of things.
yeah, I think the strong TM argument is talking about department
Your
heads.
operational things, yeah,
As
I agree.
opposed- Okay.
I
so-
agree, I
so
agree with
think
that.
it'd fall to
If you
the
did that, maybe the select board would be more likely, yep.
Which then the select board inherently, from my recollection, my thinking, is they've got the ability to create boards and committees or collapse them.
Well, unless it's in the charter, then you still have to go through the process.
But if they're given that broad ability, yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily, I find myself not necessarily interested in a laundry list of enumerating what we currently have today in order to have it in there, but rather I would try to push it up with regard to a thought process with regard to this document serving for decades to come, with regard to where should the authority rest with regard to the creation or the removal of such, previously assembled groups on behalf of the town. Just want to throw that out of how I'm framing it as we work through all these things, knowing we're going to have to interview the different groups and people and then come to some hard discussions, as Kevin, said so well.
Yep. But this is different, because it's not the operational part of the town, it's different, so, good point, yep. Okay, cool. Wow, that was a lot.
Yeah.
So that's it for this section. I'll stop sharing. Again, this is just to start the conversation. I know that you're meeting with the various boards and commissions in the next few meetings. So hopefully this could set some of the groundwork as you're thinking about the questions that you're going to ask.
I think it definitely did that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so we need to do minutes, and we need to talk about, do some prioritization of who we have come in after. The next meeting is already booked up with the Groton TM. He's been involved in this process, just so you all know. I talked to him, I had a brief conversation with him on the phone. He was involved in this process, gets multiple towns he was involved in different aspects of it. At Groton, they knew their town administrators were retiring, they wanted to do this. So they went through this charter process, and he was the first town manager hired there to take on. So he didn't do it at Groton. He was the first town manager there. But he's done it in a lot of other places. So I'm sure he'll have a very interesting perspective for us. And he admittedly said, I love this stuff, I'm a wonk. So he likes talking about it, so that's good. That's what you like. He obviously was very energetic and very interested in coming. All right, so that's that, and then the police and fire chief will be here. I don't know that that'll be that long.
It's next Monday.
Next Monday, and it'll be back at Town Hall, our usual spot. So then we need to talk about who comes in next, who we want to prioritize to come in after that.
Let's get the assessor thing done.
You want to do the assessor? Okay, it's okay with me. Oh, and Park and Rec was interested in coming in.
Yeah.
You want to do those two?
Those two.
Okay, all right, we'll do assessor and Park and Rec at the next, whatever the next meeting is, I'll figure it out. All right. Okay, and then minutes, we're talking about minutes? Somebody want to make a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
Second.
Discussion? All's in favor? Aye. Okay, any opposed? No? Okay, passed. Okay. All right, that's it, no time for the tracking document. Has it been updated recently?
I
No?
think you made the last edit, so after today, I can go
Go
back
back and do
and
the last
edit
couple or
it. Yeah,
couple,
on
and then
online.
Good with these guys.
Yeah, because and then maybe we can just look at that even offline and not have to go through it line by line, but just come with things that we don't agree with or something like that, so we can do it as efficiently as possible, since we seem to have busy meetings going forward. All right, I'm sorry, did you say something? Oh, you want to move? Okay, and then,
Just
Move to
clarify.
adjourn.
I'm sorry, did you say it, Mel?
If I could just clarify, previous meetings, our goal is to try to get through the other committees and boards prior to a public, is that what we determined? So Tim's saying yes?
I would hope that would be the case.
Pardon?
I would hope that would be the case.
Okay, so we're still, that's what we're driving towards. I just wanted to clarify as we're,
So this is a good point, though, because it keeps coming up, so, I mean, are there some people here who really want to drive this public forum and like, because I think that's going to be a whole process, so we're not going to do all in this meetings, right? And I just need to spread out the work a little bit, and I think I'd love to get a few people that would just say, yeah, I'll be in charge of that, so you can work this, figure out where we're going to be, start setting times and where, and format and things like that.
Do we have a to-do list?
Well, not yet, that's what somebody has to do, that's a problem.
Step one.
Step one, exactly.
So we are hosting the Climate Action Plan public forum tomorrow night, actually. And so I've had a little bit of visibility into what it takes to do that. And it's not, I think the hardest part to me seems to be advertising to people to let them know that this is happening. Because we can book a room, we can do all of our preparation, but if nobody actually attends, it's a bit moot.
So you're talking about the Shaker Lane thing now, or sustainability? I'm sorry. which one?
Sorry, the Sustainability Committee is having
right.
a climate
Right,
action
okay.
plan forum. So in terms of booking a room and making sure that gets coordinated is relatively straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more upon us to determine what do we actually want the purpose of the public forum to be, and then advertising it accordingly. So if it is, let us tell you about the charter committee, what is a charter, and what is this about, and then have it be a listening session. That content can then be shared, and we can book a date months ahead of time just to get it in the calendar. The other thing seemed that rooms do book up quite quickly, so if we wait too late, we might just find that we can't actually get a date.
So let's just agree at least on the purpose. For me, it's not just to say this is what a charter commission is or what a charter is. It's like, this is where we're going. Okay, it's not done, but this is where we're going. And especially if we've already had some of these discussions and so on. So,
Right.
it's not a vote, everybody gets a vote that comes in. I mean, we want to hear your opinions, especially if you know something you think it's really going to be a problem, it's not going to work. We want to hear that stuff.
Yeah, I think we put a straw man out there and say this is the direction
Yeah.
that we're going. What does it mean? What haven't we thought about?
Right,
What's-
and explain how we got here. I mean, we've got rationale for this is why we're doing this, and this is why we're going that way. And put that out there. I mean, to me, that's the purpose of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, 'cause
People
you
on
don't
board?
pop up at the end and go, surprise, this is
Yeah,
everything that might
right. So, I mean, I
So
think
if
the
we had-
standard, go ahead.
2 or 3 themes, I think we probably would want to sort of say we don't want to bombard with every element of our deliberations, but again, if we had like a couple of themes that we want to both kind of educate the public on our decision-making leanings. get
Kevin
them
Sermon
to-
earlier was
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
All right.
And then get people to voice questions, concerns, have some mechanisms, sticky notes, whatever, to gather that input.
Well, I think the biggest theme is the strong town manager
Right.
theme. What does that
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
when you say it, and then what are some of the implications? And Betsy, to your point, not decided, but here's what we're seeing and the direction that we're leaning, and then invite input, reaction, comments.
Yeah.
I'm pinning down a date, I imagine. It's sort of, once we get that, I also think it's going to help us kind of focus towards it. Otherwise, I can see it getting bumped.
Didn't we talk theoretically about a date for this? We talked about Thanksgiving, we talked about town meeting. Is that what we were trying to?
Yeah, and that's as far, and that's where it went. Yeah,
But
right.
if we narrow the topic, because originally we were going to say, oh, we want to have at least these discussions and here are some of the committee things, but if we focus just on the role of the town manager, and then the next time it could be the committees, and, if it kind of lags our discussions by a couple paces, so say,
You can make that case too.
I
Is
wish
it better to do it
I wish
earlier?
I wish I could agree with that. Let me start off
well, you
saying
don't have
that.
to agree.
No, but I wish I
Theory.
could. But because of the relationship of the strong TM centralizing in a way that doesn't, it's MOU'd, and it's just, it's a pretty significant change with regard to individuals and with regard to potentially boards and commissions and committees. And in that regard, I'm not certain that I could envision how we could separate a public, discussion of a strong TM, what it would mean, independent of the relationship and entanglements. That's why I'm just troubled. I'd love to do it, and if there's a way, I'm happy to be
Yeah.
convinced, but I'm thinking that through. I'm not certain that I can see that being a place that we
But
can
we don't want to
navigate
start
to.
going down or maybe.
And that's it.
All these-
Yeah.
I think it's a tangled web, and I'm trying to give perspective
that-
how tangled it is.
I completely agree, Robert. I think that, on the one hand, you've got maybe people who have listened to every single meeting recording and really truly want to understand the nuance of all of those implications, and the minutes are there, and I think there's going to be people who want that level of detail. And then you're going to have people who just kind of want the key takeaways, the headlines, and then, a healthy bit in the middle. But I think just also understanding that people are not going to want to commit a lot of time. Maybe it's an hour and a half sort of event. There's only going to be a limited amount of entanglement that we can probably offer. So I'd almost veer towards clear, concise communication about what we've discussed so far, and then getting people to give feedback.
So might we incorporate what Betsy said with regard to, and kind of Kevin, some of what I'm hearing you said? Could we be in the framing of disclaimer? Decisions have not yet been made, but this is the leaning. These are the principles. This is directionally where we think we're going, and we offer this as it's a part of the process with regard to still being, being assembled, and your input's valuable, and you'll have opportunity for input.
Yeah,
at a
well,
Well,
later
they can
date as
anytime.
well.
I mean, we're all here. I mean, they can contact it. By the way, Anthony and Mel, if you guys want to sign off, you're welcome to. You're welcome to stay, but you're welcome to sign off too. If you don't want to listen to this.
So I share that by way of hearing where I said I couldn't necessarily agree with Karen, but maybe I can with regard to what I just heard, because it's staying at a somewhat of a higher level. It's delving into it a bit, but not being so exhaustive to require the time and the level, and I heard that.
Yeah, because maybe we don't want to get into discussions of one particular appointment that, well, what about this one? And how some people, you can spend an hour talking about one particular thing. It's like, this is not the purpose of this general forum, right?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
have always the ability, if the public input and those people want more, to come back with regard to another one then in response to what we heard.
Yeah, always.
You always attend a meeting.
Come to any.
Come to a meeting, that's right. Find us at Market Basket, whatever. Let me get you Joe at Market
Kind of,
Basket.
they said.
Okay, so back to my original discussion of, we need kind of a subcommittee to kind of take this on, I think.
I can help with the logistics, but I would not offer to lead the meeting.
That's
Karen
okay.
might help with the sort of framing,
Yep,
so we can be a double act on it if you
sure.
want.
Yep. What time is your meeting
Kevin,
tomorrow?
is that a yes?
join. 6 p.m.
I'd be glad to participate.
Okay, awesome.
I do think we gotta put a stake in the ground on timing soon.
Okay, well, I'll let you three go and do it. How's that?
Here we are mid-August, and
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna talk about doing this somewhere, before Thanksgiving? Is that true? Probably correct.
I think we'd like to. I think we can. If we say we're going to keep this at a higher level, we haven't made all these decisions yet on these individual ones, but this is kind of where we're going. I think that's okay. People
And
agree?
If that's true,
Yep.
we've got some stuff in between now and then, don't we? We have a town meeting
We do.
want to stay away from.
Right.
There's
I
probably,
think of the day, it's
early
the end
November?
of October.
Early November, maybe this
The
time?
28th or something?
Things
and
Yes.
Does the
some
school,
holidays thrown in there.
The school info sessions.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you
there's
got all
a few
that stuff
things
too,
like
right,
that
yeah.
happening. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a busy time. Betsy, is there any, if there's three of us and are we actually a subcommittee, or are we just like a little three
Working
people
group.
working on something.
You're just a working group, it's not official.
Working group.
Yes,
Okay, thanks.
that's true too, good point. Nice thing about having a big group here. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? Motion to. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
It was a little too energetic.